This is Thorin's YouTube channel. Make sure you're tuning in, hitting subscribe.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter, and on this particular episode, we have Maniac as our guest. For some reason, it feels like we have already had Maniac on this show, but that's actually not true. If you go back and check, he has never been a guest. It's just that Maniac has been on every single CSGO broadcast for the last 4 years, and he even actually does all like 4 hours of prep work for broadcasts he doesn't even appear on. He just likes to know if he'd have said the same thing. No, he doesn't really, but he is a ridiculously diligent individual. Like, people think you're like, I actually think some people think you're trolling because you do go for the hard for the fucking extra credit, Maniac, like the little kid who brought in the apple for the teacher back in school and be like, oh Mish, what about the homework? Didn't you set homework? Like, you do feel like that when you show those pictures where it's like all your fucking Excel sheets and stuff. Like, you have to understand, Maniac, I sometimes do research as well, but I'm a boomer, so I've got like notepad.txt. I thought Chad was like, I didn't even know he was joking when he was saying that. Like, he used Notepad. I was like, yeah, of course, it's a fucking banger, isn't it? Like, you don't have to worry about spell check. You just got your nice basic. But you're going fucking hard. Like, that's real. You actually do. All that research. It's not a joke.
Yeah, I think the major was a good opportunity for me to optimize all my prep, and now I basically have this massive database with all players and, major placements and history and ratings and everything. And now I can just update the database and I can pick and choose what I do. I started to do that at the beginning because I think it was a way for me to feel legitimate. And I hold myself to high standards. I'm just trying not to fall behind just because I feel more comfortable and safe. I'm trying to keep myself to like a standard, but definitely not ratting on who didn't do the homework. I tried to stay clear on that. I tried to stay clear on that one.
No, the sad thing is, what people will never actually know is essentially it's like players. If you don't know how much people practice, you don't actually know who's absurdly talented and who's just actually like a really hard worker. So same with talent. Like, you can see the people who never do any research whatsoever and come in like, I'm not going to name names either, although I fucking love to. Just won't at this particular moment. You know what? There'll be other moments, man. Don't worry. I can put the gun down for one day. There could be a day without violence, surely. But I'll just say this: there's people in the modern day still on broadcasts where they're making calls on map vetoes. It's like, brother, they've never even played that map. Like, if you, like, when you saw like a moron on the HLTV thing, like, oh my God, they've got like a 60% win rate on it in the last 3 months. Like, yeah, every single time that was the third map or something, you moron. Like, you're going, I think they might pick this. Like, you don't even know anything about the game. So, okay, whatever. We know the people that are like that. So let's get into this episode, right? So as usual, we always start with the good point, and we all know Maniac, like 95% of his entire fucking gig is just giving good points about stuff in CS, right? So for him, this will be the easiest portion. So what did you pick, Maniac, for your good point? Probably something mad that we all disagree with, right?
Look, you're talking about French Counter-Strike kind of disappear. I still went for G2. I went for MOUZ going to G2. That is the one news that has excited me the most, I would say quite clearly, for multiple reasons. First of all, I think we all agreed, and we have agreed for the longest time, that a sniper was needed in G2. Even when they were doing great, it was always kind of the background story that, Maniac is going to have a good game out of 5 or 6, and then the last 4 or 5 games going to be a problem. So now we begin m0nesy. And then there's also the individual angle. I think this guy...
But Maniac, I thought, if he just like increased, like, say, 5 or 10%, Maniac with the AWP, then,
I think it took me out of context on that one.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay, go on, give me the... It's true, I've referenced it a few times. Give me what was the angle on that? What was the whole, like, angle you were going with there?
Well, Maniac, you mean m0nesy.
Yeah, because you used to be like a fair... Like, look, I don't know if you know this, but in English, when you say someone's an apologist in that sense, it doesn't actually mean they apologise as in they think the person's wrong. It just means they make a case for the person, So, in this case, you were one of the most famous people who essentially would sort of make that case for Ahmed.
I think
sort of like he doesn't have to be the best; he just has to be a bit better, right?
Yeah, I got blindsided nuke CT side of Ahmed, where I saw a couple of maps where he was really good. Like, I thought he was really, really good. The way he was playing, like, positionally, like, it was quite clear Ahmed was never going to flick people like Simple can do. There's never a question; it's never going to happen. But I thought, like, the methodology he was applying for nuke, like the way he was kind of segmenting the angles and playing downstairs, I thought, okay, if the way you do it on nuke right now, maybe with your coach you can apply that on maps. Just didn't happen. And I very clearly joined the crew of people who said there's a change that has to be done. You're rigging m0nesy. And I just think as a player, it is such an interesting topic, right? Because we are all completely smokescreened by the likes of Bit and Zyrathenia coming into Counter-Strike, being the best instantly, and thinking, oh my God, m0nesy is going to be the next one to do that. Let's all take a deep breath. We don't know. We know he's talented. I think Maui, obviously, you witnessed him quite a lot play Counter-Strike. We know he's talented. But how do we know he's actually going to perform so well? And that, to me, makes it extremely interesting to see his first steps, how he get acclimated with the top level, surrounded by players he respects, against very high-level opponents. That, to me, has to be the one topic of interest for the beginning of 2022.
Okay, to start with, m0nesy's mechanics are obviously better than Ominex. It's actually pretty much night and day. I'd say Amanek was probably mechanically speaking one of the worst oppers in tier 1. But m0nesy immediately, in terms of, I would probably put him at top 5 mechanics right away. Whether or not that translates to actually contributing on G2 immediately is a different story, because I mean, you were talking about Nuke, Maniac, and m0nesy has 2 official games ever played on Nuke. He's never even played against a top 30 team on Nuke. Like, the meta on Nuke at the tier 1 level is something that tier 2 players, tier 3 players have no idea what all the nuances. They have no idea. There's so many intricacies about rotations, about little nades that are going to make your life hell. And m0nesy hasn't faced any of those. I'm sure he's watched some demos. I'm sure, he's seen some of them in pro games that he's watched, but he hasn't experienced it himself. I'll say this. So I recorded a video about this m0nesy move recently. So I have like a bunch of data about this that I looked up myself. He only has also played 5 ancient games ever. Like he has numbers for playing against top 30 teams. He's only played 12
By
games.
the way, obviously I can ask you this question since you're covering it. As far as I know, one of the reasons why, right, is they have, like, for some reason, what is it about the format? They play fairly limited maps on the Academy League, right? They don't tend to like play all the maps, right?
So season 1, it was kind of a BO1 format that you basically had 3 permabans for a lot of the Academy League. This season, because
it's an Academy League to make it easier or whatever, right?
Yeah, it kind of resembles more like what they do in ESEA up to advanced level. Open up to advanced, you kind of ban 3 maps blindly. Yes. The other team bans 3 maps blindly. It's just a random of the last maps. It's kind of like that. It's not 1-to-1, but I'm not going to explain the whole Academy League veto system right now. So basically, in Navi Junior, they were able to ban out a lot of maps consistently so they could play to his strengths. They were playing a lot of Dust 2. They were playing a lot of Vertigo, a lot of Mirage. Those were the maps that they wanted to play the most. So this is where I think things get really tricky for m0nesy, because if he were playing all 7 maps in the Academy League like it was a rotation system instead, that could have shown me where more of his weaknesses lied, because they obviously were picking maps that are just good for oppers. So I think that right now, m0nesy is going to have to grow into the role. I would give him about 3 months before I'm expecting any sort of consistent output. But if they actually change their map pool to fit him, then we might be talking. Then G2 might actually have a chance to integrate him a little bit more seamlessly.
Yeah, my take on this one's a bit mixed, actually. Like, I have to say, of the 3 points, if I was picking this one, I might have been tempted. I mean, ugly isn't in the middle. It's just not as bad as bad. You can have like an angle to. I'd have been tempted maybe to put in a different one, because here's the thing. I guess I can segment it. I can see the good side, which is, as you say, if you're looking for a tier 1 AWPer, there basically are very, very few. And unless you could do something like do some amazing deal for a device or something like that, you're just not going to get someone who, like, on paper, everyone agrees, like, oh, that's a good enough player. No questions, So listen, I like the idea of gambling on m0nesy. Like, if you see, as Mauisnake points out, like, the eye test does check out. Like, he does have mega skills. And by the way, let's just leave it there. Like, that's all you can basically know, is you can just know the raw mechanics he has. It's like if you see like a footballer or a sportsman coming up, realistically, all you can initially know is how athletic are they? Like, how much like eye test do they have against no level competition? You don't really know. Like, you throw them in there against the top competition. Some of them take a while to come online. Some of them never do. Famously, there are people who are just busts, aren't they? They look like the most crazy player ever on the way up. And of course, by the way, it goes out to say that CSGO is littered with those names. So my problem is this. There's like 2 angles on this. On one angle of looking at the team structure of G2, I kind of like the gamble, because you've already got Nico. So the job is not at all, if you're honestly, be the best player in G2. We've got that taken care of, actually, mate. You don't even need to do that. In fact, we don't even need you to do that for us to be the best, maybe. We've already got Nico, mate. I'd even say having Hunter as well gives him some breathing room. Like, this guy actually can probably survive a good few months, like Mauisnake's talking about, of getting bedded in and having the hard times, going to lands, being in front of a crowd. He's sort of got breathing room for that actually, I think, for example, someone like Lockie doesn't have in Astralis. Like, he is getting sort of shown up each tournament and people are focused on him. The downside is this, because he's the AWPer, it's not really, assuming you're going to, like, in good faith sign him to your team, there's not really a way you can, like, limit the resources the AWPer's given. Like, realistically, the AWPer has the team built around him. It's one of the reasons why generally I'm not a fan of the Amnecs of the world being the AWPers. I will say, in those contexts, though, at least when you have the Amnecs of the world as the AWPer, you tend to actually say you're not really an AWPer. Like, you can play this spot with the AWPer, but, like, we're not going to give you tons of resources. We're not going to give you a backup flashman guy. No one's going to rotate to your AWPer. Like, they're not going to do that with m0nesy because there's no point signing him otherwise. In my opinion, you sign m0nesy, you expect him to be one day Kenny S, Guardian. Like, that's the whole point of the team. The only issue I have, it goes like this. I just think in terms of that I've done all that context, you'll notice, in terms of like how the team's set up, how it'll work for m0nesy himself. This is the one angle I'm not a big fan of for G2, which is they've done a gamble that, in my opinion, if it goes really well, pays off in about 3 to 6 months. I'm sort of on the Mauisnake one on this one. But the problem I have is this. Your team's ready to win today. Like, actually, you were the team who really did need the slam dunk device move. You needed the guy who joins, like the vitality move, where it's like, right, literally tomorrow we can get to work on it. How do we win this next major? How do we win the next tournament? I don't actually think for G2 that's the case. So I don't mind it. Like, I think there's a lot of positives to this, but essentially I just think their time frame was a little bit off. Like, to me, I was going for a move there, even if it was a massive, like, big money move I had to do to get the AWPer. I'd have done it just because I want to win tomorrow, you know, like, I think, and so, yeah, I think there's upsides to it, but I think, because one thing I'll say is this, actually, just to touch on the fact that you said that, like, people basically have sort of been a little bit led astray by seeing Bit and out to ZywOo, throw in Shiro if you want. They see these players and they think, right, so maybe even your Kindar, you could throw it, they go, right, what it means is HLTV.org was right all these years. You just look for who in tier 2 has crazy numbers, put them in the tier 1, and you know what? What do you mean transition period? They're just already good, and they just are. Like you see, ZywOo had like one of the best years ever immediately. But listen, people do forget, I notice. It took him like a few months, but he got amazing. Shiro obviously was pretty much good the whole time, but he didn't, I would say he had the whole structure set up around him. He probably had more resources than anyone else. But what I think people are forgetting is this. Those are the exceptions. Yes. We could now list like 50 or 100 people who looked like they had those skills. And by the way, there are people for real where the mechanics look crazy. They just never get the game somehow. By the way, Maniac should know this. The French scene was fucking full of these players. What people don't know, it was so crazy because I was having to do this video recently for the Valorant fans about Scream. And I was thinking to myself, it's so hard to explain to someone that in a first-person shooter game, the guy who's amazing at shooting people actually isn't the best player. Like, how do you actually explain that? Because it seems so counterintuitive. But there are tons of players like that. In fact, I would even say what made Kyojin so bizarre is I understand why narratively it was set up that one day he was going to be a star of Vitality. His game is based around trying to have really crisp aim. It's just that literally had almost no impact on pro play. It's almost like when he played, that never got to be activated. It wasn't relevant in tier 1 somehow. Yeah. So I would just say you can go back and look at even great players. Like if people don't know, sometimes even people like Get Right and other legendary level players, sometimes their first bump up to tier 1 was like a step back again, and then you had to sort of like lick your wounds and then come back 6 months later, a year later, a different team, and then you reinvent yourself. So I think the only issue I have here is I think, unfortunately, we're forced into a ZywOo/Bit scenario. I'd say the ZywOo one's more accurate because people, Na'Vi themselves, and the state of this move makes it seem like he has to be the best immediately. Like, essentially, they've built it, even though it's the worst branding of all time, as he is the next Simple. Like, for real, he even comes from fucking Na'Vi, and then the joke is Na'Vi are even trying to imply the reason we don't use him is because he is Simple, and we've got Simple. Like, I think that's probably the most insane pressure you could ever have on yourself. So I think there's upsides too, but I could also see how this could go so badly as well.
Yeah, it's just, the angle you took about Ahmed and the resources, I put a spin on it and I said, listen, if G2 was that successful, because arguably they had a good end of the year, they were a good team in Counter-Strike, and they were dedicating relatively few limited resources to Ahmed, and he was missing some of these shots. Now, you can gradually give more resources to m0nesy, right? First of all, what you can do is just plug him. And you know that he basically, mechanically speaking, will hit more targets than Ahmed. It's just a reality, right? Sure. So as long as he understands that, I think the structure of G2 is sound. It's a relatively good structure. They were playing good Counter-Strike for the most part. The thing, obviously, now we're hearing LexiB coming in. I have no idea what the hell is going to change to the game. But the way they were playing was relatively good. They had an AWPer that was missing shots. For now, just put m0nesy there and have him shoot more people than Ahmed. Not miss the easy shots. Have the double key when he needs to. And then as he grows into the role, you can gradually, give him more space. Put him on the leash a bit tighter, or a bit looser, I should say, and go ahead, go crazy. But they can go step by step, which is why I think that on the short term, they shouldn't be too bad. Because even if he should be better than Ahmed in Ahmed's role, I don't see a world in which he would be worse. So I agree there's going to be a development period. But it seems like an upgrade, even tomorrow. Because mechanically, you fit him in the system and say, listen, shoot. Whoever's in there, shoot. Shoot twice if you can. And he probably will do it better than Ahmed.
Fair play. Right, okay, Mauisnake, what was your good point?
My good point was another AWPer move, actually. This one is safe to Furia, and it's not just... I'm not just taking the angle that, he's going to be an upgrade over Vinny, who I guess he's replacing. It's that we're going to get to see that Furia play their signature style again, because Art has had to neuter himself because he's taken up the primary op role for the last year or so since Henny's departure, and it just hasn't felt the same. He doesn't really go for all the same flashy plays. He still does have a high attempt rate, but you can see that if he gets that one kill before, sometimes he would just keep going. He would try to find the 5v3, and I think Art has reeled himself in a lot since what we saw pre Henny's departure, and that's something that I think has kind of taken away some of the X factor of Furia. They still actually, I think, have been kind of under the radar, been performing better than people have been thinking they have, because they even just reached top 8 at a major. They're actually still a very competitive team against a lot of the better teams in the world right now. It's just that I'd say that maybe it's a style thing. It's an enjoyment factor thing. That the fact that Art can't just go for those ridiculous rifle plays, innovate on new maps. Like I was really curious when Ancient first came out. How is Fury going to play this? How is Art going to, how is he going to change the meta in terms of some sick aggressive play? Then I was brought back to reality because I remembered, oh yeah, he's the primary opper. He's probably just not going to do all the plays that he's not going to come up with them because his brain power is not dedicated towards cool new rifle innovations anymore. So I think that Safe is a huge upgrade. Actually, I just think he's way better than Vinny. First of all, it's just that there's two angles to this. One, the style improvement and change, reverting back to the old Furia, hopefully, and the fact that Safe is now out of Pain Gaming and is going to be competing in Tier 1.
What do you think, Maniac?
So the angle about Art going back to being full crazy W religion, I have a little bit of a moderated angle on that one. I think on some maps it was working. I think at the beginning of Furia and their Mega Uprise, that was something that was very surprising. I think people figured out how to play against it, and I think Art kind of missed the mark on when to stop doing that. I think he did it retroactively when it was not working rather than being a step ahead. So in that angle, I'm not too excited about that, but I will agree that every time you see a player that obviously shows potential and promises, then get to play with the best players in his region. We're talking about the Keserado, the Yuri, the experience of Art, then that's a good thing. Then I'm happy about it. They've been struggling ever since Henny left. They tried with Junior, didn't work out. Drop now is looking okay. Drop is doing what he needs to do. I'd say no reason to be too ecstatic about it, but he's doing what he needs to do. But now you have Safe that actually could just push the ceiling for that team. And that makes me happy. I'm happy every time a scene gives a chance to someone that is deserving, and that now he's surrounded by players who can actually elevate him. So for me, this is a good move. I do agree that Vinny, in terms of frag, yeah, we can talk about the Vinferno. Cool, great, that's a great meme. But in terms of general output of frags all the time mechanically, there were some limits at times. So I'm happy to see Safe being here. And tactically speaking, it's great with the AWP. So for me, that's a good move. I was happy to see that news. The kind of news that put a smile on my face. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they will do together.
Yeah, to me, to contrast it with the first point, this is a slam dunk move. Like, this is the move where the team clearly needed a good AWPer. They didn't have one. And then you looked at Safe in pain, and he was basically the best player almost every single fucking game and looked like an obvious player that needed a better squad. So, to me, that part's a slam dunk. Everyone gets why that part's good. But I feel like, actually, this move is underrated. Like, why aren't people mega hyped about this particular setup? Like, when I saw this move, I'm like, add that as another team that can challenge the likes of the Navis when we go to Avalan, potentially. Because think about this, right? People are forgetting. Like, one thing people don't do a very good job of is they do too much, like, individual, like, you analyze just the player being added. You've got to ask, like, what does it do to the team structure? So what people are forgetting is this. When you add in Safe, you already had Keserado and fucking Yuri. And by the way, that's if Art doesn't even have a good game. Like, mate, if Art actually ever has a good game on this team, fucking hell, the firepower is actually mental on this squad. It's actually no joke. Like, forget NA. For the whole world, this is a mega talented squad. This could actually be a really exciting team. So even though I agree with you, Maniac, I actually personally always found, like, the Art Furia style, I did think it was a bit gimmicky. Like, not in the sense that, like, you know, you can just figure it out. Because actually, I think the hardest thing, actually, sometimes for some teams is figuring out what to do against this style always. But it's just more like, you know roughly how they're going to play it. And it's more like, it's up to you to stop it, isn't it? But tell you what, the more firepower you add to a style like that, the fucking harder it gets to stop. Like, it doesn't matter if you know what they're going to do. If at the end of the day, the people just shoot you in the head when you go to, like, engage them, or you retake a site, or you push up to a spot where they're going to throw a flashbang. So in my opinion, I think this is a mega move. I think it fixes so many of the problems, and it's really exciting. I also don't know how the drop part will work out, but I think in this team, if you have enough raw firepower, if people can actually all play well at the same time, it's not some sort of weird role, like neutralization, where, you know, this guy playing well takes something away from the other other guy. As long as that doesn't exist, I think this is a really good move. I'm very excited for it. I've actually found Furia probably the most frustrating team for the online era, because obviously wasn't that long into it that Henny left, and then ever since then, it's just been an obvious team, a bit like FaZe Clan, where it's like the core of the team's fine, but we need one extra player. And until we have the one extra player, this feels like we're just spinning our wheels, as we say in English, wasting everyone's time, waiting for the actual real tournament to begin. So for me, finally, I can sort of like, if I go back to like summer of 2020, it feels like now I can watch Furia again. Now they're actually the real Furia. Maybe they can do the shit they could. Because if people forget as well, this is also unfortunately where recency bias like deletes the past. What people forget was right before we had the tournaments that began on LAN, but obviously not in real LAN, so we just like in boot camps at the end of 2020. That was when, if everyone remembers, when Furia came over, it's true, they didn't do very well. Like actually they underwhelmed at BLAST, etc. And they didn't have like a big end to the year. But right before that, they had genuinely been the best team in NA, and everyone was super hyped that actually they might be, if you remember, like a top 5 team in the whole world. So I think that's potentially back on the cards if this lineup works out. Like I don't think people understand how hard that safe guy was carrying. If you watch some of the fucking pain games, like he doesn't have to do that in Furia at all. Like we're saying, they have some of the best riflers in the world. I actually think, unfortunately, here's the difference. Elysian Naf got all their props for what they did online because everyone already knows how good they are on LAN. I feel like actually it's the fucking Furia guys who didn't get their props for their like top 20 ratings, because unfortunately people remember the year that they were on LAN was the year where they were the up-and-comers. You know, they hadn't actually established themselves. So I thought this when I was at the major, dude. I was like, why are people sleeping on people like K Serato? The guy's eye test's like one of the craziest in the whole world. Like you can't even look at like one half of a game and go, oh, he has absurdly good. Like you'd have to say it's so apparent to me. So I can't wait for this movie. I think it's mega. I've actually think it's sort of been a sleeper. But I also think as well, unfortunately, when a deal just seems obvious, it's not that hyped for some weird reason. You know, it just seems like, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? You should do.
I will add another point about Furia to get people hyped about this. I think Drop's better than Vinny. I think that he at the IEM, like the last NA RMR, Drop was just kind of farming everybody at that event. Like that's not something I even really saw from Vinny at any point in his time with Furia. Sure, okay, the IEM, like the RMR in NA was kind of weak. Like that's not really much of a question. But in terms of domestic competition, they played a bunch of Brazilian teams, including Godsent, including Pain, EG, all these teams that made the major. Of course, they didn't have great runs, but Drop was just like really cropping them against Pain. He had a game where he dropped 36 kills like in a single overtime. So that's kind of like I'm pretty hyped about this lineup, and I think that Drop has been kind of he's not as bad as like Linus. Okay, like think of when Linus joined NIP. I think Drop's better than what Linus did. So this is a team that I'm getting excited for, because I think not only do they have this one huge move, I think that they have also a rising rifler in Drop too. So this is a lineup that I'm going to definitely keep my eye on.
I have to say, for my good point, I don't have any, like, this is actually sort of in line with the one we've just done about Furia, because again, I think it's a slam dunk. It's an obvious one that was coming ages ago. It's just done. So my good point is, we finally concluded the will ropz to go to FaZe saga, and the answer was yes. Well, that's a fucking suspense or incredible. Like, yeah, we could have. This is the only downside to this. This could have been a bad, because this deal could have been done 1 year ago or something like that. Like, the joke was when I made the video where I revealed, by the way, think it through, dumb motherfuckers at home. How do you think I would get the information of how long ropz's contract lasts, and maybe a ballpark as to what he's making, and somehow be able to suspiciously know that he would want to join FaZe, and FaZe would want him to join, and the come on, boys. Like, this was one of these ones where, unfortunately, like, business is just weird in Counter-Strike, where, like, it seems like every party was in favour of this move. As far as I could tell, the only thing that was to be decided was A, how much is the buyout, and that was probably the main contention, and B, will someone like G2 just try and snipe them at the last second? Aside from that, it just seems like this was always going to happen as a move. I don't even know why, I mean, I do, sadly, I know what fuckboys people are in esports. I don't even know why, and this will be a separate point, to be honest, why, like, Vitality are inserting themselves, sort of trying to get themselves in the drama of that, like, oh, maybe we were talking, like, shut the fuck up. So to me, this move was always going to happen. It was telegraphed a million miles out. Luckily, though, even though we have discussed, like, the premise of it many times, it is a great move. Like, on paper, it makes sense for every single party. I even think, by the way, I noticed, we'll talk about this in a minute, but I even think that it actually works out for MOUZ Sports. Like, if you look relative to the fact they would have lost him in a few months anyway, I actually think it's an upside for them, the way this was all done and what it actually implies for their team. So I don't know what downside there is to this move. To me, it's a banger. I think it's great.
Oh, there isn't. There really isn't any downside. I mean, you can look at it so many different ways. It's a win. You look at obviously the chemistry with Kerrigan. Obviously, they've played together, wanted to play together. Boom, you can check that mark. You look about the fact that ropz can be extremely selfless, play positions. No one wants to play. Boom, that's slam dunk. He does it. You think about skill. Boom, he's got it. I mean, the guy you basically have to cater to no need. He'll do the work anyway. So it's an upgrade any way you look at it. I'm glad to see ropz. I have to be honest with you guys. ropz has been one of my disappointment and frustration for years. I've been going crazy about the lack of success that ropz has been having. Not saying he doesn't have an individual role in it. Not saying it's all about the team, but I was going mental about the fact that ropz wasn't making any deep runs. We're going to talk about it later. His run is 2021 is up. Whatever. I don't even want to talk about it right now. Finally, ropz is in a team that can see. Everyone is kind of talking about FaZe has been a contender right now. We might be a little bit quick to use that word, but it's true. Like they are actually a roster that you can picture and having deep runs. We see how Twist is playing. We see how broky is evolving. The two questions are Kerrigan and Rain. Rain has had a couple of very, very good maps back on LAN. We don't know if that's a magic spell, is that a honeymoon period, or if you actually will be better on LAN. But if you have that Rain that we've seen at the major, and then you have ropz in there, of course, yeah, sign me up. I want to watch their games. I think it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great.
I think
you just sent Maui. On this?
I think the one negative though is that now FaZe has every possible piece they could have wanted. So if there's no success, who are you pointing the finger at?
I need 9 months, Maui. 9 months.
Yeah, is it the amount of time? What is it? I mean, I think that this FaZe lineup has been just incredibly disappointing. It's just really bad. Like I have so little. There was just no excuses anymore. It felt like for a while for FaZe because Kerrigan got his X amount of time, like you're saying, Maniac. You're memeing about it, but it's true. They had so much time, and they had basically everything they wanted, or at least they acted like they wanted. I'm still not sold on the fact that they were okay with Olaf being their fifth for as long as he was, but it's just that this lineup, the way that they were losing games too, was so just frustrating, and it felt like Kerrigan wasn't doing his homework. Like I was watching the games live, and I was like, I played Premier recently before this, and we were throwing smokes that are just flat out better. They're objectively better, and they're fast. They land faster. They don't telegraph your plays as much. And Kerrigan was throwing smokes that were like from a year old. So I was like, why is he not doing his homework? Like I'm doing more homework, and I'm not even playing at the tier 1 level. So I hope that Kerrigan reinvigorates himself. I hope that they get a little honeymoon period here. Everybody goes on the demo grind a bit because they need it, because they were doing some stuff that's just outdated in terms of tactics. And if they're not able to succeed with this roster, then that'll just play. Okay, my biggest like controversial hater opinion of the last couple of years is that I think ropz is just massively overrated. I think that when you bait as viciously as he does, it's easy to get stats like that. It's actually just really easy because at the end of a 1v4, teams do just get bored. They are just going to peek you. They're just going to push you. And when you're still just sitting in B tunnels while your whole team is dead, it's easy to get that one extra kill so you have 100 ADR for the round. So I think that ropz, even though he's a super quality player and his CT side shows that, like he doesn't need too much on CT side to succeed, but I think his T side always inflated his stats greatly.
To me, that's just recency bias, though, because the problem is, like, listen, in terms of the online period, like 2021, I actually personally thought ropz was worse that year than the last couple of years before that. Like, I think if I had to pick, like, 2019 ropz is the best ropz. Yeah, he only got going the last half of the year when they were all online, etc. And then 2020, he was still pretty good because the team hadn't totally folded in. It sort of folded in the last half of 2020, if people remember, online, and then it like became shit and Kerrigan left towards the end of the year. So to me, I actually thought that last year's ropz was a bad advertisement for who he would be as a player, because I agree he played very selfishly because there was no chance to win the game. Like, this is where I actually think he was put in a really stupid position, because there's certain, like, look, his role actually does farm stats, I will say that, but the problem I think he had was his only option was lose anyway and try and win, which if in actual team games means you usually have to sacrifice and you will have extra deaths, look stupid, lose rounds, etc. Or you just go, whatever, I'm just going to sort of like, kind of like a selfish player matchmaking, I'm going to farm out a little bit and then we lose a round, whatever, I'm going to save my gun. He definitely did some of that. Like, I think there was negatives at the major, for example. I thought he played quite selfishly, but I also think that's because, unfortunately, it ties into this point. It was just always known he was definitely going to get one of these moves. He was always going to be signed by a top team, and so in some fucked up sense, he wasn't really auditioning to be in this team. I mean, he was in terms of fans, but like I said, this move was always going to happen. Like, this move, particularly the FaZe one, was almost like the backup. Like, as long as FaZe had the money and they wanted to pay it, it was going to happen. If not, go to a different squad. So I don't know. The problem I have is I do think ropz is mega. Like, I think if ropz keeps developing his game, he will be what, like, like Elige basically is. I think he'll just be like a superstar player, but with a really consistent game. You can build your whole team around him. You know, every game he's going to do what you can. And the key thing for me, it's the Carrigan angle that Maniac mentions. I don't even have to speculate. Like, when a different player, like a great in-game leader, gets a star player, ooh, imagine how this could work. I don't need to have seen it. Like, I actually literally saw it. This was the guy who brought the highest form ever out of ropz on LAN, and he was a world-class player. So the key thing is, in my opinion, you look at ropz's playstyle, look at Carrigan's history with him, the first thing they almost certainly figure out, surely, is how to make ropz a star player in this FaZe Clan team. And if you do that, everything else follows. Like, I agree, I actually still think there's plenty of flaws in the lineup and issues and stuff, but the difference is, as long as ropz is a really good player, the others are way better than MOUZ spots as players. At least I've already got pieces that can contribute, do something. We can win games around him being the best player. Because the angle I personally think is whack about FaZe, I agree that there's no excuse. As in, people like Carrigan and others like FaZe, they chose those lineups. Like, if olofmeister was there for a month, I would give him a break. They basically chose olofmeister to be a permanent player there in their lineup in 2021. So that means they essentially co-signed, I think olofmeister is good enough to make us whatever their ambition was, win the major, be a top team. Like, I don't believe that, but that's what they essentially presented to the world. But I will say this, I never thought on paper the FaZe lineup ever had any chance to be number one once coldzera left and that didn't work out. Like, on paper, let's just start again with your stars, right? If my star duo is Twists and broky, it's over already. Like, I don't even need to keep going. Like, you can list about fucking 7 duos that are better than that in the game, and forget the idea that, like, even my star is Twists. He's not even close to the best player. Like, I haven't got the best player, I've got nowhere near the best duo, and then what are the rest of my pieces? All the fucking busted, washed players. Like, in my opinion, FaZe wasn't a great team, but luckily, this is a sad piece of news for all the egomaniacs out there, but it's true. One superstar player in Counter-Strike can fix everything. I'm telling you right now, you don't know how many lineups look shit when the star player isn't there, and when he's there, magically everyone just looks better. Like, you don't have to do as much. By the way, a great thing about a player like ropz, if you do give him the resources, it infers what everyone else's role becomes. Like, for example, I actually think the guy who's going to benefit the most from this move is fucking broky. Because listen, you ready? You all get really upset and butthurt. He isn't a fucking top 20 player. He's never been for 1 second in his life. He's not even mate, the fact that he was a top 2 player in FaZe is all the problems FaZe Clan has. This has got to be the most overrated AWPer to ever play a tier 1 Counter-Strike. Because he was never a star AWPer. He's like, the joke is this, you know, I always say Simple's not really an AWPer. He's just the best player ever, and he uses the AWP as the most effective gun to get kills with. broky's like nowhere near a star AWPer. He just uses the AWP as the gun to get like safe kills with. I don't even understand it. It's like he took the Maniac approach, but slightly more skilled or something like. So I don't get why everyone's hyped. In my opinion, it's actually a sign of the problems FaZe has had ever since the Nico era, that everyone kept focusing on broky, because it's like, bro, he's supposed to just be like a decent player in the team or an above average player. If he's the guy we're talking about as the star, or like, broky's got to step it up in this game, then it's over already. It's over already. Like, this guy doesn't go for the opening fucking kills. He's not in any way superstar impactful AWP. He's just a player who can use it to get some kills. He's a fairly stable player, and he does decently in clutches. By the way, you notice that last part there? Oh, that's really hurting your feelings, isn't it? Because you're all going, no, he's amazing in clutches. Is he fuck? He's just a good player. He's just... The worst thing about broky is this. He's like a fucking 6.5 out of 10, and y'all are all making like he's bordering on a 9. He isn't on any fucking 9. The only 9s is if I'm in German giving a review of fucking broky's game, and then it'll be 9, 9, 9 all day. There, whatever. Maniac. Listen,
right,
they can't all be great. They can't all be great out the box. They can't all be... Listen, some of them don't always land, like broky and certain games. So no, my problem is that, basically, I think broky, if you put him in this position now where he only has to be my 3rd best player and conservatively use the AWP, perfect. Now we got that's the casting. It's while you guys wanted him to be like a top 2 player in his team, and worse, a top player in the world. Come on, mate. Like, even the guy early with was safe. He ate fucking broky on toast, mate. There's not even any competition between those 2 players with the AWP. Come on.
I think there's 2 things. One is a contrast effect that you were mentioning. When FaZe was going to shit and everyone else around it was shit, and olofmeister couldn't hit anyone, and Rain was struggling and Carrigan struggling, then you had Twist and broky would be the ones who eventually, from game to game, would save them. And then that was a contrast effect. People were hyping him up. Another angle that's really interesting is the one you just mentioned. Now is actually the time where we can test broky for real, because now he would have a structurally sound team. He won't have to save them from time to time. No, he will have a role, he will have requirements, and he will have to do what he's supposed to do. And that is going to be a real test. A true test of the character and the level of broky. If now he falls behind, there is no structural excuses. No player fucking up. No. It's not all going to be on you. We know what you got to do. So for broky, there's a real test beginning, because I agree with you. He's been, by contrast effect, overrated. Now it's your chance. Show what you can do. You got the pieces now. You won't be saving a ship that's sinking. You're in a lineup that is sound, and you get to play Counter-Strike.
I will add one point to this. This is actually a rare praise for ropz in my eyes. That it's just that on CT side, something I did like about his games when I watched is that he would go for a lot more openers on CT, and this does work. Actually, you know, on paper, this does work for broky because broky had the least opening attempt rates of any opper in the top 30. Any opening kills. So like this is perfect. broky can play that little style where he just hides behind a box for the whole round and then gets some like 2 free easy kills after ropz hopefully opens it up. So actually on paper, I think this is like everything about the system makes sense for this to work.
Okay. Right, move along. By the way, I even resisted. Whatever, I'll do it, right? All I'm going to say is this, Mauisnake. If you want to go hard at my boy Carrigan, and by the way, you will notice this, no one ever does, of course, I accept all results every player has their entire career. They all are an outcome of things that you did and the way the match played out. So, by the way, I don't do that thing where it's like, what about this excuse? Like, I actually do accept Carrigan's last year. I think that's what happens. Guess what? He's only a fucking IGL, not a miracle worker. Like, he can only work with the players he has. Yeah, he fucked up by going into that scenario thinking Cold Zero was better than he was. But all I'll say is this, no one could know this ropz deal would take this long. So if this deal had only taken 3 months and we'd only had all of fights for 3 months and we'd gone straight from Cold Zero to ropz, Carrigan looked like a fucking genius if the team was now like 4th best in the world. So I'll just say that, and all I'll say, I'll throw this in there, just as like one of those old school cartoon bombs, like the cherry bomb with the little fucking thing. Basically, I'll light it and just go, if you think results are really important, Mauisnake, you are never allowed to ever mention the name of Stanislaw ever again on any show we ever do. He is banished from the land forever. He is never allowed to be considered a viable IGL in any context because we're going on results here, bro. If we're going on results, it's going to get real dark for some people's favourites. So that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. If you keep calling the candle for Stanislaw, all I'm saying is, what does that look like? What is that like? You got fucking stocks in Stanislaw Enterprise? What's going on?
Okay. 4 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Years ago. I'm holding these Stanislaw bags right now. They're weighing down my pockets heavy.
All right, anyway, we'll move on now. So we'll move on now to, by the way, I suspect Stanislaw will not be returning, but that's just my suspicion there. So the bad point, right, Maniac, what was your bad point here?
So for the bad point, I picked the Faven to big move. And I want to put some context into this.
So for people who don't know, we did this last week, but as a good move. I think it was actually Mauisnake's pick, maybe even. We did this as like a great move because at the time, a quick rundown was like Faven looked really good in tier 2. Big needs more firepower after losing to Antares, blah, blah, blah. You know, it all seemed like a slam dunk, basically. So what's your angle? How is this a bad for you?
So the problem I have with it is not Faven joining big, because I think Faven is a good individual and he's great for them. I think it's a step back on what big were trying to do to achieve success, right? They had Antares, which was an international player who was very skilled. They doubled back trying to speak German with Gade. That didn't work out at all. So now they go back, staying in the German circuit. They want to keep speaking German. Whereas I believe, unfortunately, because some of these people I consider my friend, unfortunately, I think only Sursen and tabseN can play at the top level in that team. And that is it. That's the end. I know that the high caliber performing big in the middle of the online period was number 1 with Keto and with Tizian. Okay, great. I acknowledge at some point it happened, but that is it. That was just it. I don't believe that Keto and Tizian can remain at the top. I don't think they belong in a tier 1 anymore. I think they could be extremely good players for the tier 2. They probably have a lot of experience. They're probably very selfless. They have blah, 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 blah. A lot of other qualities that we list when someone is not good enough. But that's just it. I think this roster, if they want to go back to being at the top, should have gone international. I think that Sursen and tabseN can do it. Faven, all good. I'm happy for Faven. He's strong. He was always strong in the German scene. He gets an update now, an upgrade, and he can fight. That's great. I just don't like the philosophy behind it. It's big trying to say, listen, we're going to go back to full German, and we believe in the core. And I unfortunately don't. I don't believe anymore in that core. I think they have shown their limits many, many times in many different tournaments. And the big that would have deep runs tournaments is unfortunately over.
Okay.
What do you think, Maui?
All right. So if I get this right, your bad isn't the move itself. It's just
it's the philosophy behind it.
Okay.
It's the fact that it's just a minus Gate plus Faven, whereas I believe that if you're big, you have to rebuild way deeper if you're hoping to have your cards and go to the top level again. That's just a timid move, I believe, that is not going to make any great difference. That's my take on it.
Okay. I will say this. So that was my good point last show, and I definitely like the move in general. I think that actually moving to German is going to elevate the play of probably make things easier for tabseN. As soon as they switched back to German, tabseN started playing better. His stats got better. It seemed like he was just able to focus more on probably the micro around him a little bit. You know, it's when you switch back to native tongue, I think things do just get easier. I will say that to build off of your point, Tizian has been just terrible in 2021. Like that. It's incredibly disappointing to see where he's fallen to. I think I'll push back on Keto just a little bit, because I think that he sometimes has to be the first in entry guy. Sometimes it's not like he has completely shit rolls on CT all the time, but I think that T side, he has a rough job. But I think Tizian is definitely the weakest link for me, because he does play the same spots as ropz on a lot of T sides, and yet he's by far the worst player on this team. So I think that he could be doing so much better for his position. And yeah, you probably would have to go international. I'm just not as familiar with maybe who could play that role in the German space. But if there's anybody out there, I mean, maybe someone even from the big academy, or maybe even someone, I don't know. There's people in Meisterschaft that are actually pretty decent sometimes, but they probably do need to inject a little bit more life into this roster. The Faven move, I think, can actually still propel them to heights once again if they are able to ride off of the honeymoon phase. But I think that the Tizian thing actually kind of did check me there a little bit, because I don't know what the hell happened to him, because I think he was like a decent player in 2020, that 0.97 guy with the worst shit rolls possible. But now that he's like a 0.88 player, that's just terrible. You can't win games if someone's actually that bad. Like that's kind of where we are today in modern Counter-Strike, that even an IGL putting up a 0.88 for a tournament probably means you're not going to come in the top 4.
Here's the trouble, is I actually think the points you've made all make perfect sense and do actually make this move as a net overall approach potentially negative. Like, for example, if you rephrase it this way, it's not that Faven's bad and he shouldn't join big. It's who they are not signing that could have been in his position that actually contributes to this topic. And also the idea that it doesn't fundamentally address some of the bigger problems in their team. It just brings in a bit more skill, which, as I said about the example with Furia, look, it'll make your style work better, but at the end of the day, if you've got problems, like, the problem's still going to be there at some level, right? So my issue is this. One, I agree. If you're making a move, and it's not like, here's the difference. A single player move, assuming it isn't literally like, simple or fucking Nico coming over. A single player move is more like what we've got now, we want to make as good as possible. So if you're like the 4th best team in the world and you do that one great move, you might become the best team. That makes sense. It doesn't take a team that's fundamentally somewhat busted and totally fix everything, though. There's no one move in the world, I don't think. Even great in-game leader usually won't do that. So usually those moves, and I agree, you need two. You usually need two players, because you need to essentially totally change the structure of the team and add a couple of players that do things that you weren't doing in the mix. So they haven't done that, and that would have been a player like Keto or Tizian. Obviously, one of those would have been the one to go. So I have to say, I do think that the core element, this is the downside though. Basically, I'm going to spin it this way. The reason why I viewed this move as a good is because I look more from the perspective of the big organization and the players in big and what I think they're envisioning as the team. And the problem goes like this. The reason they're not going to remove two players, and especially not those two players, including Tizian, is because I think the philosophy of the big team goes like this. By default, we of course want to speak German because it means we will have a better comprehensive ability to communicate. We want to use communication as an advantage because we want to be a very tactical team. We want tactics to be our edge over other squads, and there's a lot of squads that are international squads that are just skilled players. The MOUZ Sports of the world, which used to be a German team, is a great contrast. That's not in any way a tactical squad. That's just a squad of skilled players from around the world. So that's what big could be, right? So I think what happens with big is their logic is we're going a different route. We're going the route of like Ents a few years ago, Renegades. We're going a route where in theory you have players from one region, but you just make it that if they mesh well enough, it'll overcome that they're not the most skilled players. So the problem is, in that scenario, you're not going to throw away players you've had for years and years and years. If you know people who believe in that idea of like a whole systematic approach to the game, it's really complicated. So to remember it all and remember everyone's position relative to the other ones and what you were doing, and to be able to call up strats from 6 months ago, you have to have a guy who's played years, unfortunately. You can't bring a guy in from FPL yesterday. He doesn't know anything about your playbook. He knows nothing about your vision of the game. And if you ever talk to the big guys, they're not selling you some like Astralis fucking PR wolf tickets. They really do have a whole vision of how they think the game should be played. Tabson himself basically is some sort of fucked up living avatar of God B's philosophy on Counter-Strike as far as I can tell. And this is the last point which I have to make, which goes like this. even though if I had to make this team and it's my hierarchy of values, I'd make it like MOUZ Sports tomorrow. I would break it open. We'd be speaking English. I'd bring in a couple of really skilled youngsters, a la Sprout, ENCE, etc., as these teams always do. And I'd try and just pump it up, and I'd try and make it in 3 months we're going to be as good as we can be. The downside is, though, I don't think that's in any way the philosophy. I think that's totally counter to what Big's doing. And most importantly, if you do that, Big itself instantly ceases to exist, because why is Tabson playing there? As far as I can tell, Tabson has gone out of his way to put himself in this team, in this situation, and he clearly plays for reasons other than just lift trophies. He wants to lift a trophy in a very specific way with a very specific set of people. So unfortunately, I think it essentially just, even though I agree competitively, if it's a football manager, I'd make the move tomorrow to make it like an international squad. We'd bring in some young skilled players and we'd be cooking with gas. The problem is I think essentially that's antithetical to what Big want the team to be. But I agree. I think overall, if you ever wanted Big to have a chance to be number one again, it isn't going to happen. That's just a weird thing that happened in 2020 and will never come close to happening again, in my opinion.
I want to.
Yeah, come on.
I'll add a little fun fact about Tabson. I think he's one of the most likable people in the space, and I just found this out because we interviewed the IGL of the academy team, the big academy team yesterday, and he said that even after 12 hours or whatever of practice for Tabson, he's still willing to work with the academy team for a couple of hours. So he is mega invested in the German space. It's really admirable what he's doing. I think he probably wants to build up someone on that team. Probably, if people want to know, it's going to be Aqua. They listed him as a 6-man for a couple of bigs, tournaments that had possible substitutes. And Aqua is going to be the guy that probably replaces Tizian or Keto in my eyes. So if you want anybody to look out for, keep an eye on him.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I agree with you, Duncan. Definitely, they have a philosophy, they have an idea how they want to approach the game. And this isn't the 5 skilled player playing default Counter-Strike winning. The problem is, I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen any depth tactically from that big squad when they were all speaking German. That's the issue that I have. Even when Big was actually performing great in some of these games, it was Tabson, Surson catching on fire, Keto eventually, as Maui was saying, from time to time having a good job on the secondary upper. But that was relatively basic Counter-Strike. A few good ideas here and there, good understanding of the game, because I think Tabson has that. What I don't think Tabson is he's no Kerrigan at the top or existence 10 years ago. It's just not the case. He can understand the game. He has a good vision for the game, a good feel for it. I don't believe they will create strategies that just define the way we play Counter-Strike. I don't believe that's the case. So if you want to play that kind of Counter-Strike, you need good pieces. Because you're not going to outsmart your opponent by doing things that we haven't seen ever. Sure, a gimmick here and there, but it's not the DNA of the Big we have seen the last few months. So that's the problem I see. I see a conflict between the intention of playing a deep, strategized Counter-Strike, and then you need someone that speaks German. I will agree to that. But I see a problem with what I have seen from Big in the last months. I just haven't seen it. So that's my issue. But, prove me wrong.
I really think that Toby brought so much to this roster that they're not getting with the new coaches. I think Toby was probably the reason that they reached the heights that they did. And Gobby is now focusing on Valorant too, so he's not able to dedicate enough time. I don't know. We don't need to get into all the minute.
No, but you are right, mate. If you notice, basically when he left, as far as I know, he left what was it, the very beginning of 2021, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like, as soon as he left, they basically just fell off a cliff and were never the same Big again. And if you ever saw, there was actually an episode. A lot of that content, the shoulder content, wasn't that good. But for Flashpoint 2, when we used to do that weekly show where me and Monty sort of did an impromptu talk show. Go and watch the episode with the Toby guy and you will realise, and also I did a Strapbook episode. This guy basically, as much as people put it all on Tabson, he was massively influential over that team and was basically a slave driver. He used to be super strict with people, very stereotypically German, and had a systems-based approach. It was basically what you'd imagine, but you could see how it was a positive for the team. And unfortunately, my vibe was when he stepped away because he was burned out or whatever, the team never looked the same since. They've been trying to chase the shadow of that, but they've never really been the same Big.
I love the line in that where Toby was something about his surname. People of my surname always woke up late. They always got to their appointments late. But you know what? One day I just decided I'm gonna go on time. I'm gonna be on time now. Now my surname means that we're gonna be on time, and that's just how it is now. It's okay, this guy mastered volition.
Yeah, you have to realise, unironically, because this is how German they are in Big, they were operating on that fucked up logic. Where people say, early is late because, no, on time is late because early is on time. That fucked up thing that people say. They, unironically were saying that as always a good thing. What the fuck? It's even not come on time, I'm late. What? So anyway, we'll move on now, because here's the thing. This is a spicy... I could tell this is going to be delicious. He doesn't even know it, though. Maui's just walking in thinking it's a usual Monday, like, all right, guys, how was the weekend? He's about to throw out as a bad point what could be an incendiary, if you understand Maui, the team of people I've put together for this particular episode. All I'm saying is there's biases here. Let's see. Mauisnake, let's just pretend like it's just a legit. What's your bad point, Mau? What's your bad point?
I'll give it some preface too. I'll give it some preface too. I'll say what it is first, and then I'll give it a little preample. Okay, so
no, you didn't.
My bad is that it's NBK to MOUZ.
How dare you? Okay, come on. Here's a minute. Come on.
So my bad is that because it's just more like this. It's more like, the fact is that you're never going to find a replacement for ropz. Okay, I can criticize ropz all I want, but obviously he was outputting a lot in that server. Okay, like if but NBK for one couldn't even get his Valorant career, if you can even call it that, off the ground. He never played an official match for anybody, despite the fact that he was looking and trying to get on a team. That calls into question what his abilities are like in terms of just being able to innovate upon himself, bring new perspectives to his game, his game and TAC FPSs. That's a big red flag for me that he couldn't even get on a Valorant team. And then it's just that the fact is that NBK, I understand that he can provide something as a secondary caller here and there. I feel like he's going to conflict with Dexter pretty heavily. I don't understand. I don't know if this team is going to blow up or what, is because I don't see how Dexter and NBK are going to work together, because I know NBK can be an outspoken individual. He talked about it a bit longer, which was actually incredibly insightful, and I'm glad he released that. But I don't know. I don't think that this move is. I think MOUZ are just going to fall off a cliff a bit. I think they're going to maybe move to the 25th best in the world. Like Frozen, this has to be a Frozen carry job, or I just don't really see where they're going to go. Maybe Torzy will add some firepower actually, but I don't think that NBK was the answer.
So it's a very, very broad topic that we could approach from a million different ways, right? First of all, I agree the 1-for-1 ropz NBK, there's no discussion, right? ropz is 20 times the player that NBK is in terms of mechanicals and output and whatnot. Okay, that is done, and I will give that to you. I think the difference between ropz and NBK is what he could potentially give to his teammates. And you mentioned it, NBK can be very polarizing in the sense that you either get along with him or you don't. And if you don't, it can be really complicated to work with. But the thing is, I look at this roster, I look at Dexter, Bimus, Frozen, and Torzy. Every single one of these individuals could benefit from being next to someone that used to be a champion and that knows what it is to be a champion. Every single one of them. I don't think any of them have more experience, have ever been as close to the top as he has been for his entire career. Now, I think as an individual, that's it. I don't have any expectations for NBK. I don't believe we're ever going to see the NBK of old, which he used to be one of the very best. That is over. That's fine. But I think that if they get along, if they find a way to think about Counter-Strike, then he will make everyone else on the team better. And as a result, the team will be better. But I don't believe they will. I said, I doubt that they will break into the top 10. I doubt it. But I think all of these individuals might just be better simply by the presence of NBK. Talking with him, thinking about him, about the game, how to approach the game. He's got one of the most unique and successful career we've had, at least in the French Counter-Strike. So you get along with him, you can get that knowledge, use it for you, great. I think all of these individuals will be better. But I don't think the team is going to be a success. I don't believe in the sense of a top 10. I doubt it.
I actually think this is a great move. I think the GMing in general is marvellous by MOUZ. Bear in mind, they're not a team typically that spends big money. They have to go and take. Here's the interesting thing if you're MOUZ Sports. You can't get the obvious people like the m0nesys of the world. They're going to other squads. You always have to basically pick. It's like someone who doesn't have the top draft pick in American sports. You're picking like someone who could be good, but other people had the first pick and they didn't take him. And so you're actually having to be even more shrewd. And yet, look how consistently they actually do find good players in MOUZ Sports. Like, they don't put that many feet wrong. So I'll say I actually think they've done it again, and here's why. Because the key thing for me is this. It's sort of like the NBK angle, but I'm going to say for the whole team. This isn't a replacement of ropz for NBK, because in my opinion, the key thing here is they did two replacements at once, and it's what it does to everyone's role in the team that I think is the key. Like, if people don't know, there's a quick story I could give a very sidebar, which is the team that Zonic and Ave and these guys came up with in 1.6 and had all the success with MTW. What people might not know is they made one player move where they brought in a player called Sunder, right? And even though he was one of the stars of the team, it wasn't just him joining that made the team better. The team literally became like 1.5 times better better when he joined because it swapped like other people's roles. Like one guy's role swapped slightly and then another one, and then it just turned out this made everyone's role more applicable to them. And suddenly it wasn't just him overperforming; it was like everyone went up 5 to 10%, and the whole team became amazing. So here's my vision of this team. You take out ropz, but the other part is you take out Acor, right? Acor was basically a waste of space. Like he was taking a very important gun with massive amount of resources in terms of like the raw concept of an AWP. Obviously in the game he didn't look like the team built around him or anything, and he wasn't doing much with it. So already we had a big negative there, right? First of all, the Torzy guy is another gamble like a m0nesy, but first of all, at a lower level where it's more likely to be able to succeed, and quite frankly, I think he'd be hard pressed to do worse than Acor does. So I think we've already upgraded Torzy over Acor, probably, assuming he doesn't fall flat, and that already brings us firepower, and I've got Frozen already in this team. And the best part about ropz leaving this team, I'm telling you right now, mark your calendar, 1 year from today, Frozen will be a top 20 player in the world.
yeah.
And that is the best thing about ropz leaving this team. Because him leaving this team, we've seen this happen so many times in Counter-Strike. If you're a fan and you don't understand what these guys are talking about, when they're talking about having space in a team, or getting resources allocated, or getting the role that suits you the best team ever to go and watch are the MSL teams. Because what happens is, every time a star player leaves the team, he keeps the same structure, and he just puts someone else in a different spot, and they become the star player. So if people don't know it, when AZ, Kirby, Confit, these were all the same fucking player. That was the joke. But the joke is they were all in the team while the other guy was in the spot that they were in to get all the frags. They just looked average. He moves, so AZ goes to G2, Kirby goes to Astralis, and the other guy, when he gets promoted and gets the resources, if he has the talent and it comes out of him, he becomes a star player. So in my opinion, get ready for Frozen to become what ropz was in MOUZ spots. There's number one. If that happens, now already I've got a mega player. Then if Torzy can frag out with an AWP, I've got some pretty decent firepower for MOUZ spots, dude. Like, we're not talking about being, like we say, we're not going to be the 5th best team in the world. We're trying to just crack the top 10. Like, that'd be amazing if we could be 10th. Remember, we have just lost one of the best players in the world and we can't replace him directly. Then I'd say this, right? The NBK angle, I think, is even more interesting because, in my opinion, one, yes, he is going to be a secondary caller because, spoiler, that's just NBK's brain interacting with Counter-Strike. He can't help himself. The reason why I almost understand why he has to be compelled to become the IGL all the time, actually, I used to think it was ego. It isn't. It's actually he understands that he is inevitably in every team going to have a fundamental clash with the IGL. So why don't we just skip this and I'll become the IGL? Like, it's going to end that way anyway. It's going to get to the point where it's like, well, one of us is going to leave the team. Well, if he's the IGL, then it's always me, isn't it? Like, so in that scenario, spoiler, that is going to happen. It's even why I actually think, by the way, NBK has reflected. I actually know him personally and spoke to him about this. I'm not speaking out of school. It's why he has reflected recently and come forwards with this information where he says he's been diagnosed with Asperger's. Because I think what he's doing is looking back over his CSGO career and going, but I'm one of the most decorated players out. How do I get kicked out of all the teams? Why do people always have like a fracture? And what he's realised is certain elements of his character or the way his mind works maybe contrasting or clashing with some of his teammates. So I will say the downside is, even if you're cognizant of that, doesn't mean you can avoid it. Like, that probably still will be part of who he is. It's just part of his makeup as a person. It's how he sees the world, what his hierarchy of values is. If people don't know, in the French scene, actually people even way back in the day used to basically sort of derogatory think this guy was like a robot. They thought he was too serious. He's like too cutthroat. He only cares about winning. It has to be his way. If you don't agree with him, like Maniac says, there's going to be a problem eventually. There's going to be a conflict there. And crucially, he's not the guy, unfortunately, this is the worst part. If you want your ideas, if you've got really unique ideas and you want to get them over, you've got to sell people them. NBK's approach was more like, this makes sense, doesn't it? And if you agree, then you should just do it. It's like, no, you got to sell people, mate. You got to sort of like win me over and make me believe why it makes it. You got to have charisma, unfortunately, to do that. I never thought you had the IGL charisma. You couldn't properly get the buy-in, you know. So this is the issue for me. I think every role changes because this. Torzy's better than Acor. Dexter gets a secondary caller. By the way, he desperately needed some fucking ideas. That team was just so basic, it was unbelievable. That helps Dexter. By the way, I think it's the only team ever where he probably needs NBK to insert himself a little bit. I think NBK actually is half decent in the game still. Go watch the last half of 2020 with his OG. He was still good. He could actually frag still. He could play a bunch of spots in a way that actually made viable sense in the meta at the time. And then let me think, what was the last guy? Let me think. Oh, BMAS, of course. And here's the other angle as well. I also think in this team, you're now actually going to see if BMAS is ever going to be a tier 1 player. In this squad, there's now space for you, BMAS. Like, you can actually be, in theory, one of the better players in this team, because NBK ain't coming to take your spots. He's not coming to take any resources from you. If anything, he's coming to help you be a good player. So if BMAS is ever going to make it and actually be a good rifler, this will be the team it happens in. In the last team, I did think he was just stuck in probably whatever's left over, and everyone else had their kind of priority because you had bigger names than him. Right now, it's the BMAS make it or break it show. But overall, I think the move's good. Like, look, MOUZ Sports, they aren't a team that has the money or the power to ever be what they were before with ropz. He was hard carrying them, and even then they weren't that good. So realistically, the team is worse, but I actually think the moves overall make sense. I actually like, as I say, the impact on everyone in the squad.
You mentioned I just wanted to quickly touch on that relation between NBK and Dexter, because I think it's going to be one of the key elements, if not the key elements. If you look back in NBK's history, every time he had success, he was actually getting along with his IGL at the time, and he was thinking of the game the same way. It was the case with Existence for a while, and it was the case with Happy for a while, at the beginning of Vitality, and then it fell apart. And as Duncan was mentioning, when it falls apart, then it becomes the vicious cycle of, okay, now I have to replace the IGL, and then, oh, spoiler alert, I don't think NBK is able to be an IGL fully fledged. I think NBK can be an amazing secondary caller. He can be an amazing lieutenant to a captain, right? So that is going to be my focus. If these two together can find a way to think about Counter-Strike and want to play the same Counter-Strike, then it's going to be a massive upgrade. If they fall apart and they don't see the game the same way, then it might just be a bis repetita of what we have seen in the last few years. So that is going to be the one key, one element I'm looking at.
I'll say this actually. I'm being swayed actually by your guys' counter arguments here. That I think that one other component that's going to help them that has definitely flown under the radar, because I don't imagine people are too familiar with him, is that I think Cyclone actually has done he's done a pretty bang up job on that MOUZ NXT lineup, and they even peaked at I think top 26. And when you look at the players on that team, you wouldn't really think they would have got there. But one development that has been one of the most striking features of that lineup is that Shuhei, this Polish guy that was on like Isako Boars before, like he was never even an in-game leader. They just decided to make him in the in-game leader. His calls were super simplistic in season 1 of WePlay. In season 3, they're out mid-rounding just about everybody when they want to now. So I think that his development probably was guided a lot by this Cyclone guy. And if Cyclone can give his input, if there's a trifecta of these 3 guys, Dexter, NBK, and Cyclone, working together to put together the best possible system, I do see a scenario in which this MOUZ team can improve over what they have. But I think the opposite of this is just the other possible scenario is that there's just not enough firepower, and BMOS isn't a tier 1 player.
Right, for my bad point, listen, they can't always be amazing points every time, guys. Sometimes you have to fucking get creative. It's like MacGyver. I've got a fucking piece of string, a fucking glass bottle, and a fucking dildo, and I have to create like a fucking stepladder out of that. Like, it's impossible, isn't it? So I'm doing what I can here. So for my bad one, I won't say it's an amazing point, but it's a bit of an abstract one we can talk around. There's a lot of angles, very open-ended. Basically, here's the problem. Whenever anyone becomes really relevant in a space, so a good analogy for this is going to obviously be combat sports. Think of like the UFC, when someone becomes like a contender for the belt in one of the divisions. You don't just want someone to be good at the sport, the game, because that's one component of why people watch. You also want them to have an interesting personality and hopefully get involved with a bit of, if not trash talk, like you essentially get a bit of like juice going, get a narrative going around the event, right? And the problem is this: the rise of the CIS region has been amazing for the game. Like Gambit has helped revolution. I think that, no joke, if Gambit didn't appear, this Na'Vi doesn't exist. You have a way more flawed Na'Vi that might be number 1, but they wouldn't be anywhere near the dominant force they are now. So Gambit revolutionized the game. Teams like Entropic, Virtus Pro have brought us like a new level of talent and new stars. Here's the one downside: CIS trash talk is my fucking pick for bad. It is garbage. And the problem is, unfortunately, a mixture of, as far as I can tell, culture clash and then the old babblefish problem of like, you are literally just people mistranslating comments they don't understand because it's not their first language. That combination is killing the hype. Because if you've noticed, there's 2 ways it goes with the CIS teams. Either one, they seem to almost skip the trash talk and just make like blood oath death, which like, I will destroy him. Like, is this actually, you can't tell, like, dude, is this actually like a bit, or is he just bantering? And then the other angle is this: in the same way as you can't always tell, they never get that we're bantering. They like you are aware the CIS region doesn't even. I don't think they're even aware me and Richard Lewis make jokes. Like, they think for real that like this is all hard trash talk of them as like players and people. They don't get like these are like essentially banter is about sort of just being a bit. It's just being cheeky if people don't know. It's being flirtatious, as it were. Like, you sometimes you're just playing with an idea or you're doing it just to get a reaction. You don't not like a manifesto of how you see the universe and the world, you know. And so unfortunately, I've just noticed in general, the CIS trash talk either doesn't exist or it just falls really flat. Like you see it even from Simple. What I don't get is this. If you meet Simple in real life, he is a very intelligent person, a very cerebral thinker. He's actually quite reflective. He wouldn't just say something outrageous out at the first chance drop. But if you put him on Twitter, it just looks like some ignorant moron from 4chan. Like, his takes are garbage. It's like, he is an idiot, you are a clown. Like, what is this shit? Like, the best player ever. Your response is clown emoji. That's your insightful. Like, mate, they have no game whatsoever. Because the sad thing is, you could create so many amazing narratives if these guys would just level their WWE game up. Like, they could have been amazing, couldn't it? The only one guy, and I'll give this as the exception that proves the rule, is I was ready at the major, Maniac, to flame the fuck out of that Na'Vi owner. Because, you know, before the final, they had the Na'Vi owner and they had Carlos. I can't remember the name of the Na'Vi owner, unfortunately. They had Carlos and that guy. And I thought, well, this is a fucking mismatch. Carlos is going to body this guy. Carlos is amazing at banter. But the Na'Vi owner actually won that trash talk segment. Because if you remember, he said, and I have a cheer for the G2 fans.
I remember
G2, top two, which were in the final already. By the way, that's fire. So somehow that was the exception that proves the rule. Because somehow for that one moment, he actually got trash talk. He nailed it. And someone who before that had no personality actually seemed like, well, he's an interesting guy, this guy actually. That showed you what was possible. The rest of them, I don't bloody know. I don't know what they're trying to go for. I don't, like, that's why I feel like it can't only be the language. It has to be some culture clash as well. Because I don't get it. Like, they don't seem to almost have that playful element to it. What is it? I even had this happen to me, by the way. Did you see this? After that LAN, the V4 Future Festival, that was won by Gambit, and they won in 5 maps over Entropic, right? Because the final, if people don't know, was Gambit was up 2-0, and then they just bled out 2 maps in sort of really unconvincing fashion in like close games. And then on the 5th map, they just blew out Entropic out the server anyway and won easily, right? So because I've just sat there and I'd done one of my watch parties, I've just watched 5 whole maps to get to the end result that we all knew was going to happen anyway, which is Gambit wins the series. So I made like a banter joke, like a super light-hearted joke, where I said something like, you know, like if I wanted to see people take that long to get fucked, I can't even remember what the punchline was, you know, I'd do X, Y, and Z or whatever, right? And what happened is the alien guy, who knows how you get to the tweet if you don't understand English, but he comes and he just replies in Russian and just goes, go fuck yourself. It's like, that isn't even trash talk, you moron. Holy shit. That was just a funny joke. Like, what? So what do you guys think on this? I wonder if you have any thoughts on it.
I think there's 2 things. First of all, I think there's as you talked about, you know, English and the amount of words that is usable at hand to make jokes. I think the reservoir might be a bit, you know, limited at times, which is for a secondary language can be understandable. And also, it's just intense. They are really intense. Like, they go from 0 to 100. I have the pleasure to play a lot in the morning, and obviously there's a lot of Russians out there playing with me, and some can be amazing. But when it goes wrong, then holy, it goes wrong. It goes extremely wrong. So I think there's probably also something cultural with like the intensity of how they feel and say stuff. And if they take it the wrong way, then that's it. That is it. You are in for the fight. It's happening.
I'm trying so hard to remember what Nafani yelled back at Stewie at the World Finals. It was something like Stewie said something like, you know, Navi's going to put you in your place or something. And then Nafani just says something like, yeah, but I kill you or some shit like that. It's just so basic. It's just always so basic. I just wish.
No, your mom. Huh? Your mom.
Your mom. No, you. It's like,
no, exactly. That's that level, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, you are the coward.
Yeah, but you are bad. But I killed you in the game or something like that. It's just like, okay, if that's probably being, you know, if they up their English game, then maybe they could be a little bit more verbose with their insults. But yeah, I that's a really interesting angle. I don't really remember all the quotes that they had over the time, but I think that's why it's nice when there's like a player like Iskander that can talk a little bit more on one of the teams to speak for them. Then you get a little bit more personality coming out of it.
By the way, this just reminds me, though, because actually Nafani's a prime fucking candidate. Like, this guy, again, he either looks like he doesn't know jokes exist or he just refuses to acknowledge they do, because he treats everything as a serious statement, right? So I saw he also, in an interview recently, had a comment where he was like complaining. He was saying that Apex is really nice, despite the fact, you know, he seems very flamboyant on camera. But then he said that he thought Cadian was like essentially like a bad guy because he was saying all malicious things. It reminds me, right, when Dominic Cruz fought against, I think it was TJ Dillashaw. Basically, TJ Dillashaw sort of complained that like Dominic Cruz was trash talking, and Dominic Cruz was like, we go into a cage and beat each other up. Like, I'm sorry I said mean words to you before we did it. Like, when you put it like that, it seems... You are aware, Nafani, we play a video game about shooting each other in which, when we do so, we essentially try to destroy the opponent, metaphorically. But when Cadian goes, like, Russians suck or something, you go... How bloody dare! I come from Russia and my family says, like, it's not a fucking serious statement, you idiot. The whole premise is, it's like a sport, isn't it? When you're busy jostling with the guy, yeah, of course there's a psychological war as well. If that gets you out of there, if the psychological war gets you out of there, you lost. That's part of the game. So I think that's the one area I'm sad about, because I actually think in the actual server, I even think personally Nafani was underrated, because everyone says Gambit sucks on LAN. Spoiler, go look at the results. They don't suck at all. They're just not Gambit the dominant force. They're still a very good team. And I thought actually most of his calls were good. I thought some of his players didn't play as well. But I tell you what, he is fucking garble at the trash talk side as well. He just doesn't get it, mate. And half the time, he's just like, here's the worst thing. He's just like performatively offended about everything. That's probably the worst part. Like, why are you, like, mate, Nafani, two things in 2022. Either one, level up your fucking trash talk game, or two, just fucking dye your hair blue, rinse. Just give us a fucking warning sign from nature before we come in. And, like, just let us know that you're offended by everything. You're probably going to try and decolonialise the fucking terminology of Counter-Strike next week. So anyway, whatever, that was fire. So, right, now we'll move on. So we'll go on to the ugly portion. Some would say the last 5 minutes of my rant could be considered ugly. But
we already did. We're there.
That's by the by. Yeah, it's just a segue. So, okay, Maniac, what did you pick as your ugly point? By the way, I'm super interested in this, Mauisnake, because even though I know what it is, what on earth would Maniac pick as the ugliness of the world? I feel like he tries to avoid that. He's the guy who wakes up in the morning. Good morning, guys. Nice cup of coffee, little jog on the treadmill. Oh, you know, we're all having a great time. Like, what is the ugliness of the world of Counter-Strike right now, Maniac? What's your point you're going for?
You're right, Duncan. It needed an effort for me. Try and find ugly. You know, it's a way to look at life. Look, we're going to circle back to a theme we had earlier on, because one of these days I opened HLTV and I saw ropz's number 18 rank in the top 20, and that hit me like a brick in the face. And I thought, holy hell, what has happened? I think a part of my brain just refused to think that ropz would be ranked so low, because I romanticize him, I guess, as a player because of the last 2 years and how great he is. I still believe he's one of the 10 best players of Counter-Strike we have. And I just thought, what the hell, that cannot be possible. So I went and I actually looked at the results. I looked at MOUZ year and I thought, holy, that was a terrible year. That actually was. And all of the bad points that you guys were mentioning about him being selfish in situations, that is actually true. It actually turned into this. The ropz that was really strong with MOUZ, that was making so much difference, then turned into a selfish individual who was trying to either save his name or save his game, been already ready for the next step, as you mentioned, that FaZe move being, you know, lurking around for a long time in the shadow. And that just reminded me of it. Like, damn, that was a bad year. That was a bad year when you have the talent and the skill set that ropz has, which he's kind of unique. Not a lot of players with the rifle out there who can do what he can. But 2021 was ugly. It was ugly as a team. I think it was ugly towards the end as how he was playing in the team. So that is my ugly point. ropz, 2021, not how I romanticized him at least 2 years prior.
I want to bring up I guess this is an American sports concept that people have talked about before. And after our discussion on kind of the NBK move to MOUZ, it makes me believe that this can possibly happen here. And it's called the Ewing theory, where basically when Patrick Ewing was he was an NBA player, and when he was either benched or injured or like basically left the team played better, even though he was clearly the best star on the team. And I think that there's a possibility that the ranking for ropz is fine. And actually, you know what? I usually don't agree with the positions on a lot of the HLTV list, because I'm like, oh, this guy just farmed stats. He didn't really have that much impact. He didn't win a lot. But this is one where I thought that it was actually justified. I thought that he played MOUZ played pretty poorly with the exception of Flashpoint 3. And I think that there's potential if MOUZ just do better now, that's going to be one of those moments to me where I just get so much validation in the way I've been thinking about ropz as a player, because who as a teammate wants to see my guy in like not doing anything for the first minute and a half of a round and then suddenly just get one kill then die also. It kind of rubs me the same way as when you go down in basketball. If you just see a guy dribble down the court, doesn't pass the ball at all, but just does a little spin move, dribble, crossover, then just jacks up a shitty 3-pointer. I get the same vibe when I watch ropz play. That's why I like have this whole thing against him, because I know that if I see that on my teams, I'm just like, dude, just fucking die. Like no one needs to watch you attempt this impossible clutch. So I think that with your point about it being ugly, Maniac, I think it's good. I think it's deserved.
There's two ways I can go on this one. One is like, obviously, half of what you just did there was one was like your real analysis of ropz, and then the other was like a meta-contextual point about what you think about the HLTV top 20 ranking, basically. So I'll do the second one first, which is people will know I'm not a huge fan of the HLTV list. That's why I prefer to call that list a Serbian list. Fire reference, if you know what I'm talking about there, because it's also full of just degenerate shit that shouldn't exist and is fundamentally antithetical and disgusting to me as a human being. But enough about that. Anyway, so yeah, exactly. It should yes, because it should never be seen by children.
Yeah, that's true. Because they just take it at fact.
Here's the problem I have with this list and the ropz angle on it, because I actually do think, look, as much as I agree, I actually do think ropz sometimes farmed and was greedy and selfish and blah, blah, blah. Like, here's my problem with that list, right? I don't know what we're doing anymore if we're calling it like, here's the problem. It should just be something like, I suggested this years ago, but I'm being serious. The name of the list should be, if you want it to be accurate, something like the most successful individual players attenuated by team success. That is actually what the list is. What you're trying to do is, this is the fundamental concept people don't understand. Because it also works off not just MVPs, because there's only one of those, it works off like EVPs as well, which is the people who have the better performing stats in each tournament. Well, that particular category essentially is what makes up the body of how people get filtered out on this list. And the downside of that is it is directly based on how deep your team goes in the tournament. If you play 3 maps in the group stage and you have a 1.5 rating, it ain't going to matter whether someone else has half your rating if he goes to the semi-finals. You're not even in the equation to get on the list at that point in time. Essentially, that's treated as like, well, I mean, good job, but like it doesn't really matter for you. Like, you don't have the sample size and those what the right, there's a million factors go against you. The problem is when we are ranking, if me and you are asked like who are the top 10 players, top 20 players, we don't do that at all, because we're basing it in an absolute sense of like who are the best players regardless of team concept. Like example, if I made if I told Maniac tomorrow, pick in order the 20 players you would start a team with, he's not putting ropz fucking 18th, is he? So as a result, we're doing a different thing when we judge how good the players are. So in my opinion, that is the fundamental flaw of that list. Because when I look at that list, again, look, I'm not the biggest broky fan, but even so, our broky fans really going, yeah, Elysian ropz, right around the level of broky ads. What? What are you talking about? Elysian ropz are 2 of the best riflers in the entire world. Because their team isn't good enough to go to the semi-finals every tournament. They're at the same level as broky, and by the way, below twists. What? What? You are aware Twist hasn't been better than Elise for like 1 second in his life, mate. Maybe like ESL New York 2018 or something. That's about it. What are we doing here? So my problem is like the list itself's all over the place. Like you need almost more explanation for why someone is in a place on the list than you do of whether the player's good or how good he is. So to me, it's ultimately a distraction. I don't mind it as a premise because I like the idea people contrast the players and try and review the year. And I do think, by the way, it serves a very good purpose in terms of you get reminded of things like I'll give you an example. When everyone was doing the whole Bit versus Sheer Roll thing, I pointed out, like, Bit barely played the first like quarter of the year. Why are we ignoring that? Like, again, there's a lot of interesting things get brought up, but I do agree. If we're doing the HLTV list, I actually do think ropz is way better than that list. Like, I would probably, off the top of my head, I think he'd maybe like 12th on my list or something, or 11th or something. Like, I actually think a lot of those names don't make sense. Like, again, same for Kserato. I test on Kserato, does it say he's the 15th best player in the world? And like below, I'm assuming, like, get ready, there's going to be like 3 Gambit players, 3, maybe even 4 Navi. Who the fuck knows? So, in my opinion, like, some of these don't really check out with the eye test. Now, in terms of the ropz angle that he's had a bad year, I also sort of agree with Mauisnake. Like, I actually think in a way it's justified, and more importantly, I actually like it in the sense that, like, I don't want ropz to think that, like, he can play the exact same way and be the best tomorrow in FaZe. I do want him to actually realise he has to, like, look at his game in a really brutally honest way. He's got the skill set to actually be, for real, I think, like, a top 5 player in the world if he gets his shit together. So as long as he, like, humbles himself and, like, sort of rededicates himself, I think he could be a MOUZ. I hope this is just a wake-up call, Sadly, I do notice this is one of the things we've got to do as well in Counter-Strike, in my opinion. There's got to be, like, a gradation to how much praise you get for being on these lists. Like, spoiler, if you are ropz and you're 18th, I wouldn't be bragging about that, mate. You should have been top 10 if things are going well. Look at the team you were on. It's like when Nico, one of the years, Nico was like, I think he was like 14th or something one year, wasn't he? Like, wasn't it like that phase year? Like, I wouldn't be proud of that if I'm Nico. That's a down year for me. That's a bad year. Like, 14th is brilliant if you're like fucking frozen. If you crack the list, fucking hell. Like, if you're ropz, mate, like, unless you're in the top 10, don't even talk about with me. That's not an accomplishment for you.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it has to be a call for action for ropz as well. I mean, I can understand that there can be something demoralizing about being ropz, in MOUZ with his talent, with his power, and what he basically can do in the game, realizing, hold on a second, we cannot do it. We're not going to win. This is not the team that can win. And then I can emphasize and I can understand that he would then become gradually a bit more selfish and then maybe put less of an effort and less blood into it. Fine. But now you're moving on to FaZe. That cannot happen anymore. That is it. This is when, that moment when you move to FaZe is when you get to decide what narrative it's going to take. Was it, oh my God, ropz is amazing. He's back to his form. He's doing everything in FaZe. Or he just became kind of lazy. He just became kind of selfish. That is, I think we're at a cross point right now. Because if he doesn't have that call, that wake-up call, as you're mentioning, it's not going to work in FaZe either. So he's got it. He's got it all for him. He can right now prove that the little bit of a letdown we saw was just I guess a fruit of the context that can happen, and I can accept that in a way. But he's got to have a reaction as well as a player. That 2021 was not good enough for ropz standard.
What was your ugly point then, Mauisnake?
Yeah, my ugly moves away from the top pro scene, but I think it's wholly relevant to it. Is that in Counter-Strike CSGO, the matchmaking system is pretty poor right now. So this is my ugly. Because it's pretty clear that compared to other games, there's just no one cares about the in-game matchmaking. And this is, like, I usually want to focus on, like, pro CS and stuff like that. But I think that when it's such a arduous process to move from being a casual player to then having to download third-party clients and to move to FaceIt, then you have to grind FaceIt, and it just feels like the route to pro is so just constantly, there's constantly all these little hitches and speed bumps and things that, I have to download this other anti-cheat client. It just feels like it's too much right now. I really just wish that the path were a little bit clearer so that someone coming up into the game today, because the game gets a ton of viewers when pro CS is on, but if you're a casual player, you really do have to ask the question online or do a bunch of research, like, how do I get to these leagues? How do I play in this stuff? Whereas I think of Dota because it's the game that I followed the most closely beyond CS. You actually can just play in the matchmaking system, and if you're a player like Thorin, who got onto those OG lineups that won the international, the way he got noticed was because he was playing at just high MMR games. He was just playing in those high elo games. What No Tail and Seb liked what he was doing in those as an unorthodox mid player, and then they recruited him. And there's nothing even remotely close to that in matchmaking, and nothing you do in the community servers or matchmaking system of CS holds any bearing whatsoever on any path to professional play.
I agree, and I think it's sad. Unfortunately, I'm completely biased in that one because as being an ex-professional player, that became irrelevant to me extremely quickly. Yeah. So I never had to fight through that, right? I never had to go through that. And I agree with you. If you have to, there are multiple issues. First of all, just on a technical standpoint, why do we have to play on freaking 64 ticks and the game feels horrible? Why would you even want to do that? And then, I think it's the ceiling is way too low. You get to the highest rank. That doesn't mean anything. So you don't actually get to celebrate the fact that you are at the very top. That doesn't really mean anything. Yes. You have to get to external leagues. So why would you? It's not rewarding. It's not nice to play. So in that sense, I have straight up moved to the next step, which is, yes, indeed, I think the FaceIts and the Rankers back then of the days, these are actually the platforms to do specifically what you were mentioning, bring the light on some players. ropz is famously a player that went through FaceIt, FPL, and then was picked up. But I agree, the built-in system that we have is a tragedy. And it is, unfortunately, one of the cold shower between the casual and the competitive community. There is still a lack of bridges between these two, and I guess you're right. That is a problem.
Yeah, the main problem I have with it is because I actually play League of Legends, as people don't know, for fun, although I will say, because I'm me, I don't give a fuck about A, winning, or B, etiquette. So if people don't know, if people have never known this, if you know anything about League of Legends, but you've never heard me say this, I'm going to say it because you'll just love how it fits my personality. I play support, but all I do, every time it's available, irrelevant of any other champions pick, is I only pick the champion Pike, which is the amazing one that has all the, you can go invisible, it has an execute, you can roam the map, it's just one of those sickest, playmaking champs. And by the way, I just go for plays all the time. I'm your night. If you're like a normal AD character, I'm your nightmare because I either just stomp the whole lane in the game, or I will die 12 times. So people, I am a pike terrorist, like in the lobby, in the game, and also by the way, if we start losing, I'm out the lane. I'm just going to be going and split pushing all game long. I'll try to just help. Basically, I'm going to help the other guy in another lane win the game. So essentially, I play the game the way you should for myself. But as a result, I know the main flaw that these games have as casual games where you're not playing in a stack with people you know. And the main flaw is this for Counter-Strike, is Counter-Strike the game is not defined in a strict sense like those games like League of Legends and Dota are. In those games, there's a place you go to on the map, there is a role in the game, and within that, it's not just inferred, it's explicit. There is a concept of how the meta of Dota 2 plays out, even if we're 5 people who've never met each other. Like, you can immediately sense if the guy who's the carry doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't understand he's supposed to stay in carry, for example, or if the jungle doesn't know like, you can tell that immediately, and there's almost a sense of even a pleb that's never met of, like, roughly the etiquette how we're supposed to play. That doesn't exist in Counter-Strike. You can see when you go in matchmaking, you're playing with people who have never seen a pro game of Counter-Strike. Like, they don't actually know what Counter-Strike is to you and me. Yes, so basically, the problem in Counter-Strike, in my opinion, is, like, people, literally, they don't understand even the most basic meta concepts ever. Like, for example, they don't understand if I'm on CT side of Mirage and I'm the short player, and I push up to the catwalk, maybe the guy connector should like team with me and should like check low for they don't know they've never seen a match, so they don't know that. They're really just going like, I might peek now. It's almost like you may as well just be NPCs. You're just bots just doing stuff on the map. So as a result, if you're someone who has any connection to pro Counter-Strike, it's going to be the least satisfying experience you've ever had, because you're going to do that thing that everyone's done. You're going to watch the major. You're going to watch G2 versus Na'Vi or Nuke and go, fuck, Counter-Strike's such a sick game. I can't wait to get in there. And then you get in there and 3 rounds in, you're going to go, what is this? And it's the same game. What the fuck? And nothing's going to be the same. You're not going to have any fun because it's not going to be like that at all. And so here's the issue I have. I actually think Counter-Strike as a game doesn't work as a casual game, as in what we play professionally, 5-a-side, tactical Counter-Strike. That isn't a fun casual game, unfortunately. Like, my analogy would actually be European soccer Maniac, because anyone who's played 5-a-side football, there's 2 ways it's fun. One is you have a real team, therefore you have structure. Like, I'm the defender, I pick up the ball and pass it to you because you're the midfielder, and then this guy's waiting because he's the best striker. If we have structure, it's fun. We can play competitively. If we have pure casual and it's 5 friends a stack, we can also have fun. Now, it doesn't matter how much you suck because you're my mate, so I'm not going to go mad on you if you miss the goal because we already know you're not the best player. You know, if that's not, those 2 ends of the spectrum are really good fun. But if you've ever done this, and a lot of people in Europe will know what I'm talking about, if you've ever gone to one of those leagues where you sign up and you get just put into a random team and you play 5-a-side and it's garbage, because it's the same concept. Like, every cunt thinks they're the striker and they should be the one scoring, or no one plays defense, or someone's just selfish and dribbles all the time and doesn't pass when you're open. Like, it's a nightmare. It's the worst of both worlds. It's not actually what you'd hope it would be. So unfortunately, I just think, and in some ways, the MOBA games are more apt to the era we live in that sense. Like, they're sort of like the information burden in terms of the concept of the game is very low, and people from the game itself understand how you can play it. In Counter-Strike, essentially, and this is not even a joke, it's like if you could just drop a bunch of people in a game, and suddenly in this 5-a-side game, you have 5 goalkeepers. It's like, we don't have a striker. Like, that happens in matchmaking. Who hasn't played? My biggest qualm about matchmaking through all of the history of Counter-Strike has been this. Who the fuck likes when you play a Dust 2 game and then everyone goes into those B tunnels? Are you ready? And that's it. They just stay in the B tunnels. Because why would I go into B? I could die there. It's a choke point. Well, then why are we even in the B tunnels? Because we all know in pro Counter-Strike, nobody just sits in the top part. By the way, you sit in the low part. Nobody sits in the top part of B tunnels for the whole round. But that is Counter-Strike, because in matchmaking, everyone is afraid to die. Like it's a real, like it's the Matrix, like you die in real life or something. So as a result, everyone knows it's terrible, isn't it? It's one of the worst, like least fun environments of all time. So I agree. Unfortunately, though, I think it's almost inherent to the game. I don't think we can level people up. Like, I actually think this is where Counter-Strike can't go much farther than it has now. I think we've done an amazing job getting like a broadcast product, and I think I'm amazed, by the way, so many people play the game. I'm amazed when we hit those viewer peaks, because I don't really player peaks, by the way, because I don't really get actually what the average player gets from playing the game. I think watching Counter-Strike's pretty disconnected from playing the game. You don't have to play it at all to have the same enjoyment, in my opinion.
I'm so sad because the example you just had for matchmaking, I have the same thing in level 10 face it, right? So it goes really high up. Goes really high up, but I'm just going in a place and then I see these two guys behind me waiting. I'm like, but what about long? He's got to be behind us. So yeah,
my other joke always used to be, it's like whenever you play those games, it's like their character just has a slower like movement speed because coming out of spawn, you always seem to overtake a Maniac. It's weird. They're getting caught on boxes. It's weird. I don't know why. I'm like a speedrunner, mate. I can always get to the fucking choke point fast somehow. It's amazing, isn't it?
My God. I agree. Look, the thing is, I think that the tactical threshold is really high to enjoy Counter-Strike.
Sure.
I think that's the thing, right? I think, at least for me personally, there needs to be a minimum of understanding of what we're doing in order to have some fun. And I have to realize that for a lot of people, they aren't there at all. And this is why I can understand really to separate very strictly casual and competitive, fine, because I don't think the same rules apply, which is why I think the short games are cool, like these 9 rounds, whatever. You're casual, want to have some fun. Let's go, just do a short game. Who wants to play 50 minutes of Dust 2 or Nuke when no one knows the position and wants to play? Because you won't have fun. Sure, individually you can carry if you're really good, and that I guess that's the difference between a mobile and Counter-Strike, is that if someone is feeding bottom lane, that's it. You might not win the game. You can carry in Counter-Strike, but the tactical threshold is really high, and a lot of people don't have it. So I actually struggle to see how they have the fun, and I'm amazed that they have fun when they do it, because I don't even know. Even myself, I go crazy sometimes. I stream in the morning, I go crazy because the threshold is not met, and it turns into an absolute clusterfuck.
Yeah.
And I will say as well, by the way, you know, when I said like in 5-a-side, you also need like to have a proper stack. Otherwise, it's not fun. I will say as well, it's not even like it's that much fun even when you play on the third-party apps. Like, mate, you don't know how many times I've played at like 2:30 a.m. Maniac, and I would have like active pros. I would have like NBK or like fucking JW or someone like that would be on my team, and even they're getting farmed by the fucking vampires that just live and play 8 hours from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Or like, you know, those fuckers, like those. People think we're joking. Those people are like better than Zero. Like, they're unbelievable. They're like, listen, let's be real. It is because they are just knowing that no one good plays at 3 a.m. So they are just benefiting from that factor. But these people, you would never seen Ferrari peaks at these motherfuckers pull off. They know every corner. But it's if they don't wall hack, they actually just study the game. Like, it makes no sense for face it. Like, why would you be studying the game? Like, you know, because what's bad is you're not a pro. You're nowhere near a pro. But you're wasting my time as though I'm actually playing against Gambit now, and I'm trying to have fun. I'm trying to go like, it's my Mac 10, and then they're like covering all angles with like flash assists, like get the fuck out of my face. So yeah, anyway, let's move. Right, here's the thing. This is the last point of all, but it's an open-ended one. It can be as short as long as what we'll see, which is this, right? I've picked for my ugly point Vitality's PR approach. And the reason why I say this is quite a subtle point. I think, because if you didn't notice, because Vitality's done what, listen, is one of the blockbuster moves of all time. They've brought in 2 of the most decorated players of the last few years from a totally different region, culture, language, everything. They're trying to make this new squad, which is pairing Ziwu with these major winners, with Sonic, the greatest coach ever. And they're trying to do this whole system. If you notice, like, one thing I'll credit them for is they're trying to basically go the approach that Astralis themselves were early on. Like, you do team building exercises and you make people learn each other's languages and stay together. And you overcome basically all the sort of minor issues that people would expect you could have in an international team. You do things that take you a step further to like bridging those gaps, resolving issues, etc. That's all great. But my downside is this, because they've done this flurry of PR, because they're doing this move where they're trying to get the bigger headlines. They've done all these different interviews, the CEO, the esports director, right? The approach they've taken, basically, I think personally, they've tried to just do a bit of a G2. What they're trying to do is say a bunch of really big, potentially incendiary, sometimes controversial statements, which gets you some eyeballs on you. And then the idea is why G2 did it back in the day to a great effect. If your team is also really good, once the eyeballs are on you, it's like Floyd Mayweather, then you perform and it emphasizes how wonderful you are and makes you a huge star, right? The problem is this, G2 can pull it off because they have people like also who have fabulous charisma. Even if he's telling you to your face, like, fuck you, I fucked your wife, he'd have like a grin on his face where you know he's being playful, isn't he? He's being cheeky. So as a result, it doesn't sting the same way. You know, if he said like, oh, we're better than Na'Vi, you know he doesn't really mean it. He's just saying it to provoke him. The problem is, if you don't have that aspect shaded in where you know the person's not totally serious, you can look like a clown. And unfortunately, some of the statements they've come off with in the Vitality PR, I don't know if it's the language translation. It hasn't landed. So I'll give you an example of some of the small grab bag they've said within the last week or so. They basically tried to imply there was a star player they could have signed but didn't sign, and that he just only wanted money. And then bizarrely, that's been implied it was ropz. Even though, as far as I've heard behind the scenes, it isn't ropz. It's someone else. But even so, why are you? I don't know why you're doing that already. You're almost being like, if my angle, if I'm Vitality, is I chose these two players because they're amazing. They're people who've won majors, and I'm going to make a new squad and have a new era. That's almost like I could have signed other stars as well, but they just care about money, so I signed these guys. It was like that's almost like you're undercutting your own guys you signed. Then there's the angle where it was basically implied like, oh, thing with ZywOo is like I don't know if maybe he's more talented than Simple, because Simple seems like he works really hard. Why on earth are you ever undercutting like the best player ever? And not only that, but making some like utterly, in my opinion, inane assessment of ZywOo and Simple. Like, first of all, how do you know how much Simple practices? You're just going off stuff you've seen on stream. Two, I've never understood that trash talk. Essentially, it's a shit version of the trash talk that made UKCS terrible at Counter-Strike, which goes like this. Yeah, you might be better than me, Maniac, but you probably just bloody try all the time, you loser. I was fucking women last night and I'm half as good as you, so who's really better, right? Well, the joke is, if you actually care about the game, you go, well, him inarguably, like you just said he's way better than you, you're out fucking women. Like, only to a fucking kid does that seem cool. Like, I don't know why that'd be good. Guess what? That sounds like fucking ZywOo doesn't work hard enough, then you dumb fuck. If he's just going to be the second or third best player, by your own logic, he should work hard and become number one. That doesn't make sense. But the whole point is it gets everyone talking. So to me, there's a whole bunch of there was another one as well, where it was basically implied that like the fucking Astralis players could have gone elsewhere for maybe 2 or 3 times the salary, but they chose Vitality. What a weird argument to make. My angle, if I'm Vitality, is, of course, I broke the bank. I just signed 2 of the greatest players ever. I'm putting together a Real Madrid of Counter-Strike and we're going to win the major. Why are you then going, you know what, I even got for way cheaper than they're worth. And you know what? They chose not to go. What? I don't. Aside from getting attention, and by the way, I'm talking about right now, so in that sense, it's worked. I don't know what the point of these statements are. Like, I can't tell if they're all legit and they really just have, I mean, in this case, an outrageous stereotypical French arrogance / hubris, because like these statements are outrageous. And just bearing in mind, as I say, these aren't people who were very front-facing to the international community. Like, outside of the French scene, nobody knows like they or Maniac. Nobody knows. I don't even know the name of the esports director. Like, they're not famous people in that sense. So actually, I don't know their personalities to know their characters. So I don't know. Like I say, I'll leave it open-ended for you guys. But I found essentially these statements all kind of like either missed or I don't think they accomplished what they wanted personally. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of memes based around this personally.
So I just want to preface my comments that I haven't read the entire, because I know there's like a very long interview on it, so I don't want to be talking out of my ass, but I get the sense. I get the gist of what you're saying, and I think there is this idea that is trying to be put across that Vitality as an org is something bigger than the players coming in, than what is going on. Right. And I don't personally like that. I understand what they're trying to do because they're trying to create, I guess, in the mind of the players and the community, something bigger, greater. Doesn't matter if tomorrow they lose ZywOo, Vitality will remain Vitality. I think that's what they're trying to do. But I think it's at the expense of the players joining. I agree, it's kind of undercutting as well. I don't want to know that Astralis could have gone somewhere they win it for less money. I don't want to know. I want to think that they joined the team because they see a competitive aspect to it. They want to win. That's all I'm interested about. So I think there is a little bit of a mismatch of interest in that one as well. I have heard also that there are some digs at the players who are leaving, and I don't really like that. I think there's no point in that. I think what they have established as players, like ochs, for example, as a coach, was fantastic. I don't want to read anything bad or what. I don't think it's necessary. You've had a very long run. You've had arguably some great results here and there. Sure. It's coming to an end. As a team, I think they acted the best way possible at the end of a team. It was great to see them together, enjoy the last few events, have some decent results, go on a grand final. That was great. There's no need to throw any punches. That's it. You can just move on. So I'm not a big fan of that. But again, my take on that will remain quite modest because I don't feel like I have the actual team expertise.
I will say, by the way, I think you actually framed what I was trying to say better, which is essentially they are trying to do, let's be real, I mean, Zonic should know this. They're doing the Astralis approach, which is, as you say, the org is always bigger than the players, even though the Astralis is the best example ever. If there was one org that can't be bigger than the players, it's that particular fucking Counter-Strike team. It's the best team of all time. Like, let's be real, it was the players, not the org. That's just the way the game works. So, there's definitely some of that. Because if people don't realise, especially in the modern day, people know that, like, most stars aren't going to stay in one team for 6 years. So they want to make it, like, they don't want people to think it's ZywOoality. Because then if ZywOo leaves, as you say, what's Vitality, right? It's just nothing. Come on then, Maui, what do you think on this topic?
So there's a couple things that struck me in the interview of what you said and what I read about it. The first is that I think I'd say the Neo guy is just trying to prop himself up a lot. He probably wonders why is the CEO of an organization not having more followers on Twitter than their best players.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean that's why he wants to prop himself up. Like, look at how good of a businessman I am. I got them for cheaper. You know, those kind of little things. Those comments are just like that again. Like you're saying, Thorin. Those are not necessary for me to know that you guys made a slam dunk deal. Like, I like when I know that people are spending a lot in the Counter-Strike space. Another thing is that the whole angle of ZywOo versus Simple, like, but ZywOo doesn't even have to try that hard. It's like, were you labeled as a gifted kid as a child? Because no one gives a fuck today. Like, just don't worry about that. If you're not trying anymore, you like, I don't know how he got this position on this thing. So I would have assumed he achieved something in his life so that he had the CV necessary to get put into the CEO position of Vitality. But right now he's reading to me like he wants to show everybody how little he tries, how little he spends, and yet they still succeed, which is like a really kind of self-perpetuating toxic way to like perceive yourself. It's going to just lead to you having a lot more faults, and you it's kind of like the people that do that are people that just kind of want to always give themselves a little bit of a comfort zone, so that, oh, if I fail, I wasn't really trying
the
that hard.
jail free card. Yeah
but then because they know that if they do try and they fail, then they're going to have to face the brutal reality that they couldn't succeed or live up to what they thought they were capable of doing. There were some other lines in this that were a little weird.
By the way, as a quick sidebar on that point there, though, because actually I want to get Maniac's take on that, because if people don't know, that is probably the most famous sort of almost character flaw of the French psyche, is the idea that like the coolest guy is the guy who fucks around like Conor McGregor and does cocaine and fucks a bitch and then beats you in the fight. That's actually considered cooler than the guy who just like Kobe Bryant, work like 12 hours a day and then win because you were practicing more. That is sort of almost part of the character, right?
It is, and I think Maui nailed it completely when he said very basically that if you as an individual try your hardest and fail, then you have come to the limits of who you are. And it is a very, very terrifying idea and a terrifying concept. I know, I'm going to be honest with you guys. You've just summarized my studies. That's who I was. I was really good, not excellent. Because I always had a little bit of space. I could have done more for my thesis, but I didn't do it. I got a good grade, not the best one, but I could have worked more. And I think that is a lot of individuals have that breathing room that they leave for themselves, where they are very scared to give their everything, because then you meet your limits. And I don't think as a society, a lot of people are ready to do that. So I think you nailed it, Maui. And it might be prevalent in the French scene to an extent, but I think it's a very human trait to try and protect yourself with a little bit of breathing room so that you can always hide in that shadowy zone that you left yourself in case it doesn't work out. But it's also when you do that, you never really amount to anything great, because you never really gave you 200%.
What was the rest of your point anyway, Maui?
I had some other quote that I liked in this that kind of was okay, yeah, this one. So one other point that he had in it was that he says that I told Zonic within 2 years we have to win a major, and then he says in the same interview, but in 6 months I know that we might have some problems or something. I was like, what? How long do you think these Counter-Strike rosters last? Like people are getting kicked within, usually back in the LAN days, I would say that rosters had maybe a 3 to 5 month lifespan before you have to change something if you're not winning or coming top 2, top 3, top 4 consistently. So if they're not coming out the gates, if they go 6 months without coming top 2 at an event, I'd say this roster needs to change. I have so much belief in this roster. I think that they should be a top 3 team immediately, like literally the first tournament. If they're not top 4, I guess semifinal finish, then I think there's something that needs to change right away. And I don't know if that's going to be an IGL change or what. It doesn't matter. Either way, I don't get this cushion that he thinks that this is a 2-year lifespan project. Like this makes me feel like this guy's really detached from what esports is, and he's thinking with a more like
it's more like a football take, right? Yeah,
it's more of a normal. Because
if you do
mindset.
a signing, that would be reasonable in sports to be like, in the next couple of years we want to win the championship. Yeah, you don't win immediately, obviously, a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah. A sports process takes a couple of seasons to build something great, but an esports roster should be doing it within six months in my eyes. Anything longer is kind of like, all right, let's rethink things.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Iskander, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Toucan, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joy, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks goes out as always to Jerky's Minion, but also to Jeremy Dole. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want to ask me a question for one of my video AMAs? Want teasers sponsors, find out who the guests are. Would you like to take part in a lengthy esports discussion with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.